Time to explore deeper 3D in After Effects. The goal is to fold up this cube into 3 dimensions within After Effects. The cube is broken up into different layers. Side 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Import this file into After Effects. File, Import File. Select the cube.ai. Make sure Import As Composition Retain Layer Sizes. Click on Import. Open up this composition by double-clicking. And the goal is to fold this into a 3-dimensional cube. All right, now that we're within the cube layer, let's make each layer 3-dimensional. Click, 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 and click. Well, we're done. No, still have to fold this up. By the way, if you ever see my visibility off to a different side than yours, these icons can be dragged by clicking and dragging to a new position, such as over there. Going to just dock it where it was. Back to the 3D layers. We need to strategize before folding it up. The anchor points or the pivot points are in the center for each one of these layers. For this layer, that's fine. But for this layer, if we're going to rotate this and then have to push it back, that doesn't make much sense. Go to the pan behind anchor point tool, select it, and just move the anchor point to the edge. Turn on snapping, drag it in the center to snap. I'll pick up the move tool, so I'm not using the pan behind, and I'll roll over. And there it is on the y-axis. I'm looking for the degrees, and the degrees should be 90. I want to get it kind of in the right place. I could just go to this layer, go under rotation, which is R, and for the orientation, type in 90. This layer looks like it went into the distance, which it did in a rotated point of view. Let me add a camera to this scene. Right-click, New Camera, and use the 2-node camera, not the 1-node. I'll accept all the other defaults and click OK. The shortcut for the camera tool is a C key. Watch up here, C, C, C. It'll go between the 3 different tools of orbiting, panning, and dolly in, dolly out. I have orbit selected. Now I can orbit around like this. If I want to orbit up and down, select this tool, freeform. And now I can orbit all the way like this. If I want to orbit just around the center, orbiting is now constrained to the horizontal. To pan, just pick up the pan tool or press the C key, and then you can move up and down. And you're moving up and down a virtual camera. And to zoom in and zoom out, use the dolly tool, which is, again, just click the C key and drag up and down to zoom in and zoom out. So C key for orbiting. And then picking the type of constraint, freeform. Could also orbit like horizontally like this. And then off to the right side, click the vertical constraint. Now you're rotating vertically. So this will help during the assembly of this object. First thing we did was to rotate this 90 degrees. Going to select this layer. You could just click if you don't know which layer is which. S3. I'm going to rotate this layer, not with the rotate tool. Pick up the move tool. And on the y-axis, it should be -90. Roll over until you see the Y. You can click on the circle and just drag it. before I do that, I have to move the pivot point again. Pick up the pivot point, which is the Y, drag the center with snapping on, drag it to the edge. And while I'm here, might as well do this one. Drag this one down to its edge and drag this one up. We'll talk about this one in a few moments. Put down the pan behind tool, pick up the move tool again, click on this layer, and now wait until you see the green gimbal and just drag that -90 degrees. When you get close, you can just open up this layer, press the R key to expose the orientation and rotation. -90 degrees would be 270 degrees. Going to the top layer, S4. I'm not going to be rotating along the Y-axis. I'm going to be rotating along the X-axis. We already placed the pivot point right down here. Now just drag it down till you get some number like -90, which should be right there. Opening up this rotation, that should be exactly orientation along the X 270. Selecting this layer, clicking and dragging it up. And when you're close enough, open up this layer's rotation, S5's R. R is to reveal the rotation, and setting the X to 90 degrees. Well, what about this layer? Pick up the camera tool, C key, and this is the pan, C key again to dolly, and C key a third time for orbiting. Let's take a look at this. It's in the right orientation. Just this layer has to be positioned at the back. We could rotate it 180 degrees and then put it in the back. It doesn't matter. Let me pick up the move tool, V key, clicking on this cube, lift it up, kind of matching layer to layer. C key to orbit, V key, and move this layer on the Z axis. Pick up the orbit tool, clicking here or the C key, and there is our three-dimensional cube. Congratulations, we're now in 3D space. We're not rotating the cube, we're currently rotating the camera around this cube. Let's explore this cube in a new scene now that it's all assembled. Throwing out the camera here, because I don't need it anymore, it was just helping us assemble. Make a new composition, new composition. Calling this my final scene. Drag the cube into this scene, and it'll look flat. Why? Because we have to activate the 3D-ness of this layer. Even though these layers are in 3D, when it's out here in the scene, it's considered a flat piece of artwork. The purpose of this would be, if I temporarily put a camera back in, the 2-point camera, and I rotate it like this, and go back to here, we now have a flat piece of art that looks dimensional. It's a workflow where you can set up your 3D art here and treat it as flat art out here. That's not what we're going for. Let me delete this camera. Second time deleting that. This is what I want to happen. I want to put a new camera in this scene. And this is a reminder that cameras and lights only work on 3D layers. If I orbit this camera, since I don't have a 3D layer, nothing's going to happen. I must change this composition of cube to a 3D layer. And right before I'm about to orbit it, if I orbit now, oh, it's flat still. Why? Because I have to click the rasterization layer right here. Now you can see the dimension, and I can rotate this cube out here. I'm going to move the pivot point for this cube, and I'm going to do that in 3D space. Picking up the pan behind pivot point tool, going to move the pivot over here. I'm going to drag it in the center till I hit the center. Now the pivot's in the center. I want to rotate this cube and create a little animation of that rotation. My choices are to use orientation or rotate around the X, Y, and Z. Since I took the time to set up the pivot point to be in the center, I'm going to rotate around the Y-axis. Do that, open up rotation, just pressing the R key at frame 0, clicking on the Y rotation, going to frame 90 or 3 seconds later, decreasing the second number of Y rotation to make it go counterclockwise or increase it, make it go clockwise, and watch the number as it hits 360. That first number will change to 1 because that means 1 complete revolution. I want this to rotate once around the Y-axis. The numbers will look like this: 1 time 360 degrees, 0 any leftover of degrees. And here's the animation. And of course, we can add a loop out to this. And there's a continuously rotating cube. To get more cubes, select the cube layer, press Command D or Control D to duplicate, and then move it on down. To have this cube to show different side, let's look at the rotations. Since each side of the cube is 90 degrees separated, if I go under this new cube's orientation along the Y-axis and type in 90, we just rotated the cube 90 degrees, and now they'll be out of sync by 90 degrees. If you want it to be not so uniformed, instead of 90, you could select 45. Experiment with the orientation to offset the rotation. I also want this cube, besides rotating, I'm going back to the original cube, pressing rotation. Instead of just rotating along the Y-axis, frame 0 along the X-axis, it's here. Clicking this arrow to go to this key position right here. On the X property, going to type in 1 full revolution along the X-axis. Now we have this tumbling cube. I'm going to apply the same loop out script. Option click, loop out. And there's a tumbling cube.